Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and today we'll continue our discussion from the previous video. And if you remember, last time we talked about some of the genes, some of the important information regarding their composition as the base pair, how much DNA is there in case of eukaryotic cell, what is that number, and some of the interesting facts as well. So today let's directly jump onto the video. As you can see here, I'm planning to explain some of the important things regarding the mitochondrial and the chloroplast DNA. So in eukaryotic cells, what we have is basically some amount of mitochondria. So we call it as a mitochondrial DNA, or in short, mtDNA. In case of plant cells, we also have chloroplast, and we call that DNA as chloroplast DNA. Inside chloroplast, you have chloroplast DNA. So we call that as a chloroplast DNA molecule. Okay. So this should be clear, these two things. Next is mitochondrial DNA. So I think I need to write it. Mitochondrial DNA is basically small in size as compared to the nuclear chromosome or the DNA that is there inside the nucleus. And next, one of the important points regarding the mitochondrial DNA is also we need to know about those numbers. It's approximately 20,000 base pair long, and then which approximately is like 16,569 base pair of the DNA, less than 20,000, and then this is the number, that specific number, the base pair. Okay, what is next? We have some of the organisms, they have multiple copies of DNA molecule. So here it is written that, okay, you can have one or more copies of DNA molecule, especially in case of organelles like kinetoplast. So kinetoplast is the organelle, and if you remember parasitology, where we have discussed what are kinetoplasts and where they are present. One of the organisms that contains kinetoplast is basically trypanosoma, right? So trypanosoma is containing kinetoplasts, and they are nothing but the more copies of the mitochondrial DNA. What is next? So this is the mitochondrial DNA. It's going to be circular in nature, and let me write it down. So I can write down here mitochondrial DNA, and something like this is much smaller than the eukaryotic chromosome. So these numbers, if you can remember these numbers, they are important. And also you need to know that this DNA is smaller than the nuclear chromosome. And next is trypanosoma. We talked about trypanosoma and its DNA. It can have more mitochondrial DNA in the organelle called kinetoplast. Okay, plant cell. Let's talk about plant cell. So in case of the plant cells, right? So the size ranges of the mitochondrial DNA from 200,000 to 2,500,000, 2,500,000 base pairs. So that is the size of the mitochondrial DNA in case of the plant cells. And next, if we talk about cpDNA, which you probably remember, we talked about the chloroplast DNA, and the size ranges from 120,000 base pair to 160,000 base pair. So that is the average size of mitochondrial DNA as well as the chloroplast DNA. So these numbers are also very, very important. So memory type questions, they can come from these, and that is something you need to remember. So in this slide, basically we just found out that, okay, mitochondrial DNA is there, chloroplast DNA is also there. What is the size of those molecules? And then we took the example of trypanosoma to explain the kinetoplast, further plant cells and its mitochondrial as well as chloroplast DNA. Okay, now let's move on to the next part of this particular topic. Okay, now we are on the next part where I will try to explain few things here. So this is the structure of the mitochondria. mitochondria, right? And this is the green structure which is sitting in the center, is basically the mitochondrial DNA molecule. This is how it is located in the mitochondria. Next is, if we talk about mitochondrial DNA, it will have certain amount of genes, and what are the roles of the genes. Now, how much proteins that are going to be coded by those genes, how many other molecules are there that are being coded by the mitochondrial DNA, that also we need to remember. So in case of mitochondrial DNA, you have first RNA that is being formed from the mitochondrial DNA, and many of the tRNA molecule are also being formed from the mitochondrial DNA, and then few mitochondrial proteins. This is interesting. So maximum amount of mitochondrial proteins, they are coming from the nuclear chromosome. They're not coming from the mitochondrial DNA. So this is important. It is responsible for mainly for tRNA, rRNA, and few of the proteins. Okay, moving on to the next point, which is the more mitochondrial DNA and the relationship between the nuclear gene, which I talked about just about the protein here. So how many proteins? More than 90% of the mitochondrial proteins, so not here, so let's write down proteins, are coming from the nuclear genes, right? More than 90% of the proteins. So this is the number. Next is, moving on to the next point, which is here, I've just tried to illustrate the structure of the cell. Now, cell division process. Now, when cell is going to divide, right, so cell is going to divide, its mitochondrial DNA also need to divide and then transferred into two different daughter cells, right? The same mitochondrial DNA. That is why it is going to replicate independently, and then it is going to move to the daughter cells. Okay, next, moving on to the another topic, when the mitochondrial DNA is going to divide. So mitochondrial DNA is going to divide before or during the process of cell division, right? So what I'm trying to mention in this case is basically mitochondrial DNA will divide during the cell division process or before the cell division process, so that it can be equally distributed between the daughter cells. Okay, let's move on to the next part of this video. Okay, so we are on the next section of this topic, which is maternal inheritance. Now, this is linked with the mitochondrial DNA. Those who already know about mitochondrial maternal inheritance, and they probably should know that mitochondria is basically coming from the mother side. So when we talk about nuclear chromosomes or nuclear genes or nuclear genomes, the DNA that is there is coming from so the 50% is coming from one parent, and the 50% is coming from the second parent. So in this case, I'm going to write female here and then male here. So 50% is coming from female, and then the second one is coming from the male. So 50%, right? What about the mitochondrial DNA? So the mitochondrial DNA is going to come from only single parent, parent 1 in this case, which is female. Why? Because what happens during the fertilization, suppose this is the sperm here, right? So it is coming from the male side, and then it's moving towards the egg. So this is the egg, and inside egg you have the mitochondria and mitochondrial DNA. Next is, so let me write it down, this is the egg, and this is basically the mitochondria. mitochondria. Now, mitochondria is present in the egg. What happens to the mitochondria of the sperm? What happens is, so basically mitochondrial DNA of the sperm, what happened to it? It is destroyed after fertilization. So this is another important point that you need to remember. Then what happens is when the mitochondria, when the fertilization takes place, the mitochondria from the sperm will be destroyed. Basically, only the mitochondria of the female, which is present in the egg, will contribute towards the future generation. So that is something we called as maternal inheritance, that all the genes responsible to code for RNA, rRNA in the mitochondria, tRNA in the mitochondria, as well as few genes, they are specifically coming from the female side. So this is something we need to remember. So basically children will always have additional component coming from one parent, which is female, in every case. So you can see the female is going to contribute towards the inheritance for the mitochondria. That's why it's known as maternal inheritance. Now, another important point is mitochondrial DNA is prone to high mutation rates. Now, mitochondria is always linked with energy, you know that, right? So it's a powerhouse of the cell. Now, to require energy, a lot of chemical processes are happening. Because of that, a lot of reactive species. So let me write it down. Reactive species, they are chemical reactive species. So they are chemical reactive species. They're getting formed, and then they can destroy the mitochondria or affect the mitochondrial DNA. Because of that, new mutations, they are going to get incorporated into the mitochondrial DNA when it is going to divide. So mutation rates, they are high in case of mitochondrial DNA. They are not significant in case of nuclear DNA, because nucleus is protected by the nuclear membrane. So the chemical species that are getting generated in this cytoplasm are not going to influence the nuclear genome. That is also one of the important advantage for the nuclear DNA, that is, it is present inside the nucleus. All right. So I think that is all for this video, where we try to cover a few of the important points regarding the mitochondrial DNA, chloroplast DNA, and then we understood what is maternal inheritance. We also found out some of the important numbers that are associated with the mitochondrial DNA as well as chloroplast DNA. So you need to remember all those points, and then we'll continue our discussion from this one. And this is the chapter which is related to genes. We'll have a lot of different topics, subtopics, and one by one we'll try to cover all those points. If you are following through, then please do follow and watch all the videos. So it's more like a continuous series, where you are getting the knowledge of biochemistry, and you are basically strengthening the topics of biochemistry, and that will be helpful for you to understand various topics, and also prepare for the competitive exams. It can also help you in the projects and so on, right? So we'll have that series continue, and I'll try to bring more topics in a similar way. We'll have continuous discussion and series on those one, so that it's a chain of videos. And also we have a lot of other videos on specific topics. If you want to find those topics, what you can do is just type the name of the topic and then tag the basic science series as the extra line in that particular search keyword, and hopefully if the video is there, you will be able to find it out. Right? Okay, I'll meet you in the next video. Till then, take care and happy studies.